So what do you do when you have a property that has environmental issues? Maybe it used to be a dry cleaner or a gas station, or maybe you think it
Yeah.
might have been, where the lender requires some sort of environmental report. Well, we're lucky to have Ami Adini, who is a expert in the subject and has a business of reviewing these things and helping advise buyers and owners of property about the environmental status of the property. Ami, it's nice to see you today. Thank you so much for taking time with us.
You're very welcome.
I will say I had a nice visit with your daughter, Sigal, as well, a little more pleasurable. So, give me a little background, though. How did you, where are you from originally, and how did you get into environmental sciences?
Well, it's a kind of a long story. I'm originally from Israel. I'm Israeli. Was born in Israel, grew up, got educated in the Israeli Institute of Technology in Haifa in mechanical engineering with additional credit nuclear and chemical engineering. And right upon graduation, I went to work for the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission in a nuclear facility. I spent 8 years there in operations, management, maintenance, construction. And then I went to work from there with the Israeli chemical industry. I worked in the Dead Sea with a chemical plant. I worked in the Israeli refineries for a short while, and then immigrated to the United States in 1977. I graduated in 64,
Wow.
immigrated here in, I'm just January, I'll be 80. So,
wow.
All right, so I have quite a background behind, and I should say that I'm very healthy and have very good genes and very active in sport and in work, and I'm blessed with having a beautiful daughter and a beautiful wife. So everything is great, just great. So thank you. Anyway, so came here in 77 with my family and worked at first in Stamford, Connecticut for a couple of years with chemical engineering companies, moved here, worked here with chemical engineering companies in the design and construction and operation of chemical plants, hazardous wastewater treatment systems, and eventually I gravitated to the environmental industry and started my environmental consulting business in 1988 and immediately became a general contractor in Class A, general engineering, and the hazardous waste classification. I was one of the very first hazardous waste contractors, hazardous substances contractors. They just started this classification back then in around 1988. And so I became a contractor, moved from there to do environmental, started with a phase one already in 1988, where it was not yet defined what the phase one is. I remember Texaco USA had a big judgment against them at the time. It was called the Pennzoil judgment, $11 billion in 1988 money. And they had to liquidate many oil fields in a hurry. And so they retained our services to do a phase one. And so we gave them a price, we met together, and then we said, okay, what is a phase one? You know, what is a phase one? So now we have a contract to do a phase one. What is a phase one? What do we want to achieve? And anyway, we defined what it was. From there, we went to work with the city of Anaheim. All of the civic district today of city of Anaheim used it to be at the time a rundown neighborhood. And we went there property to property and investigated it, 500 properties, and moved in a big way into this phase one and phase two, and became a contractor because we found out that when we find contamination, we find it by taking tanks out. So we started to take tanks out. And then we found out that when we take tanks out, we better know how to put tanks back in place, new tanks. So we became a gasoline station contractor, and we did probably about 40 installation of underground tanks and removed a couple of thousands of tanks. And at the time, and doing all the time this phase one and phase two and contracting, and I arrived till this day. I reduced my company because of economics, and also decided that it fits my nature more to work as a professional on a quote unquote smaller scale. Not that I work less, I work more than when I had my company. I work more hours now than ever before. And but I find it very rewarding to do what I do, because I have so many associates from the time I had about 20 employees, and several of them went off their own, created their own companies, and we group together as needed, and we can do any project and any size.
Nice.
Right now, I'm engaged in a major refinery project. It's going to be a very nice project of a cleanup. So that's on in a few
Nice.
words about what we did and where I am now.
So I'm a real estate broker, and where I come in oftentimes is somebody's buying a property, and either they're concerned about the history of the property, or a lender is requiring a phase one. So let's talk a little bit of what does a phase one, what does the buyer or owner of the property end up knowing after phase one is completed?
Well, as I say, usually by the time we finish phase one, they know what to worry about. Okay, if they have not, if they did not worry about anything before that, now they know if they have to worry or not worry. Okay, the phase one, basically the intention or the goal is to say, hey guys, looks like you may have some environmental liabilities. All right, what we do, we need to remember, we inspect the property visually. Excuse me, we research records on the paper, we research records historically. We do not do any intrusive sampling. We don't know if it is contaminated, except if I see like a big puddle of toxic waste on the ground, then I know, okay? But usually that's not the case. Usually I walk into a property, it's very nice. If they know that I came, they cleaned it up even before that, they do a good housekeeping, so I don't see anything anyway, all right? And so we need to know what could be under the surface. And this is what we do by the phase one. We research all the way back to the time it was first developed. We use aerial photography, geological maps, geophysical maps, city directories, building permits. We go into over 130 government databases and research them for anything that may read on the property. And when we are done, we tell them, well, what do you know? You have a history that 40 years ago you had a dry cleaner, or you had a very flourishing printing business there. And these kind of witnesses tend to generate contamination. So you need to know, and we declare it a recognized environmental condition. That's the terminology. And we say, okay, you have a recognized environmental condition. And now it is up to you, or dear client, if you want to resolve it or not. I'm not telling you that you need to do a phase two. It depends on your needs. And then they tell me, what will a phase two say? I say, well, a phase two will tell you if you are contaminated or not. Realize that the phase two is just a yes or no answer as to whether you are contaminated or not. It's like a blood test, you get a reading, okay? What does it mean? I mean, you're going to have a heart attack or not? We don't know yet. We got a reading, all right? So in phase two, we know if you are contaminated. And quite a few times when I do phase two and I say, what do you know? There is contamination. They say, how much will it cost to clean it up? And I say, I don't know. I don't know, because I know that you are contaminated. I don't know how deep it is. I don't know how wide it is. I don't know how it changes in depth. If you want to know that, I need to do an extended investigation. So
let's stop 1 second right there. I'm a simple person. I'm not an engineer. So the phase one, are you doing sample testing at that point or not?
No.
No soil samples at all?
No.
Strictly historical research, photography, observation, but everything is on the surface or above?
Correct. And whatever history can tell me under the surface. Sometimes there was work done under the surface and there are reports. Sometimes there was work done next door under the surface and there are reports. So
got it. So phase one does not require soil samples. Phase two would be soil samples, but not drilled necessarily complete. They would be what? Samples. So how far down do you typically drill when you do a phase two?
It depends on what I expect. I'm sorry, not what I expect. It depends on what I'm concerned about. And if I'm concerned about a toxic vapor in the soil, then I would go, the deepest that I would go would be 5 feet. If it is bare dirt, not paved, I would go down 5 feet and take vapor samples from the soil. If it is all paved, good pavement, then I will go just under the pavement. and see what has accumulated under the pavement and take samples of the soil vapor. Now, if I'm concerned about contamination that sticks to the soil, let's say there was a gasoline tank there, and I'm concerned, then I may go down maybe even 20 feet and take samples of the soil every 5 feet and see if there is a problem.
Got it. So standard phase one is historical research, prior reports, no physical. Phase two is going to be some limited soil samples, 5 feet typically, maybe 20 feet if there's something more concerning.
Yes.
Is there a standard price for phase one? I'm sure it depends on how big the property is, but let's say a commercial lot in Los Angeles, is there a standard price or range of prices for phase one?
You know, there is no standard. It depends on what consultant you call. So there is a range of prices typically, and I see them sometimes I see them going very, very low, but then I see the quality of the reports and I understand why. And but I would say reputable consultants, I see them charging anywhere from about $2,600 to $3,200. That's about the range.
For the phase one.
For a phase one, yeah.
And then phase two would depend on how many samples you need and how deep you have to go. What would a typical range be for phase two?
Typical range for a phase two, I would say, would be anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000.
Okay. Now I know you mentioned you did the tanks and some of the gas stations. Do you generally do remediation, or generally do you at that point create specifications and the customer gets a contractor to do the remediation?
Well, in present time, in the last few years, I've not done, let me think, had I done? Yeah, I did do remediation, as a matter of fact, just 2 years ago. So, but in that sense, I acted as a project manager under my client. I helped my client retain the contractors,
Right.
and I managed the entire project under my client. So they contracted directly with the contractors. I managed the contractors.
Got it.
I found that this works very well for my client and for my company. Although, because I'm a general engineering contractor, I can contract for the whole thing. Depends what my client prefer. But I think it works for them more economically when I act as their construction manager rather than as their contractor. But I can do it anyway, any ways they want.
One of the problems I've heard is that buyers will inspect a property and do a phase two and discover need for more work almost as negotiating play. Do you see that happening from time to time?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I've seen cases where buyers did what they called a phase one, but they actually did phase two drilling, discovered some contamination, and used it almost as a negotiating weapon against the seller. Have you seen that happen before?
Well, not in this exact scenario, but I definitely have seen prospective buyers using the test results as a negotiation leverage. And there are some buyers out there, sophisticated buyers, that understand contamination and they understand the risks that they take, and they use it as a leverage, definitely. And just 2 days ago, I got an email from a broker telling me, Ami, he's got a client, he's looking for contaminated properties. And I said, what do you know? I've got one for you. You know, here is one in Santa Fe Springs. I saw a city of commerce, and it's contaminated. They have not been able to sell it now for a couple of years, and go for it. So I know right now he's contacting the listing agent, and they're starting to talk about it. And
Nice.
yeah, so of course I will use it as a leverage, and it's reasonable. I had a property in San Dimas recently where it was contaminated, and the buyers bought it cash. They couldn't get a loan, so they bought it cash. Usually these are cash buyers. And so they bought it cash at a substantial discount, and they have it.
Have you ever invested in properties that were contaminated and act as an investor?
Not yet, although I may look into it. I don't have that much resources, financial resources, in the magnitude that enable me to do this kind of transactions. But if somebody wants me to participate on an equity basis, maybe I'll be happy to do that.
We should talk sometime. Maybe we should talk, or maybe Sagal. She's a go-getter too, so we should
Yeah,
maybe look into that. Well, look, I really appreciate you really give us a lot of detail, and I appreciate you're a professional at this, and this is not. I think sometimes we underestimate the technical detail that goes into these reports, but it's important to get done. It's important to get the right information. It's also important not to get the wrong information. So I appreciate your time with us. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, I know, Ami, that I have your website, and there you have, in addition to your handsome picture, it's amiadini.com is the website, AMIADINI.com. And
yes,
right there, you explain the details. If you hit the little contact box, you'll have an opportunity to put a contact form in.
right.
And there's a phone number as well, 323-899-5001. Is that the best way to reach you if somebody want to get in contact with you?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, again, I appreciate Sagal setting this up, a chance to meet with you. Look forward to working with you going forward. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome anytime.